Welcome to the Indian Journal of Law and Public Policy Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another important episode of IJLPP Podcast. In today's episode of podcast, we will be discussing about one of the most intricate issues that we are facing, that is that of women's rights in India. For today's episode, I, Rishika Jain, a consulting editor with IJLPP, will be a host. We will be having three-member panel. First one being Avani Kaushal, who has been an ex-LAMP fellow and a former member, a senior editor rather, with IJLPP. We also have with us Pranav, who is currently the consulting editor with IJLPP. We also have with us Suvaiba Fatima, who has worked towards women's rights. She also has a dedicated blog wherein she has expressed her ideas and thoughts through her poems and other write ups. So let's start with today's podcast where we'll be discussing three very important issues pertaining to women's rights in India. So in today's episode of podcast, we'll be talking about women's right in the Indian society. So starting with the first topic that we have to discuss for today, it's about the representation of women in the political scenario in the past 71 years of the Indian independence. My first question would be for Avni. Avni, I would like you to ask you that in 2019, one of the celebrated event was post the election period. It was the fact that India recorded the highest number of women MPs in Lok Sabha, with 78 women getting representation. So, do you believe it is actually a victory with regard to increased political representation of women?
Hi, Rishika. Thank you for your question. I do find these developments particularly laudable, but I guess we are still far from emerging victorious, when it comes to political empowerment in India. Because we have examples of countries like Rwanda and Cuba, which are not particularly well developed in GDP terms, but their women representation in parliament and political empowerment per se is laudable and really sets an example for India to emulate. And I think I really see political development and emancipation of women in what really happens inside the parliament as well as what happens outside it. When we come to what happens inside, we really want to see parliamentarians, be it male, be it females, or anybody else for that matter, taking up the causes of, say, gender budgeting seriously, or debating women centric issues, and really addressing policies that bring to forefront the fact that women need special attention and care by our policymakers. On the other hand, when we see political developments outside the parliament, we really need to question the fact that whether political parties really find women, winnable, because that's what really drives politics. Is a candidate winnable enough? And our political parties really see women as serious contenders? And in fact, do we have enough role models in politics yet? Because I'm being reminded of the Permanent Service Commission judgment that was just recently sent out by the Supreme Court, and the government submissions were really chided for being extremely misogynist. And then it really questions the fact whether a government and by extension our policymakers see women as equal stakeholders. And one more important thing that I see when it comes to political developments in the country and in the parliament is the fact that there's a certain cloak of invisibility when it comes to the work that women have done in the past. In the 15 members that we had in the Constituent Assembly, how much do we really hear of, say, an Amrit Kaur or a Begum Rasool for that matter? And I think that's really one aspect of the problem that needs to be rectified. We need governments, of course, to trust women, but we also need that there is politics that empowers them to be trusted. So I guess, of course, it's a very gratifying situation to be in, where the number of women representatives are increasing. But I think we still have a road and a long road ahead.
Absolutely, Avni. I think that all of us duly agree with you. Now, moving to Sueba. Sueba, taking cue from what Avni has just told, my question to you would be, so with few strong headed women leading the states, Do you think representation of women in politics has been mostly limited to being a member of parliament or legislative assemblies to a large extent? And is the supposed affirmative action of 33 reservation for women still relevant or redundant?
Hi, Rishika. Thank you for your question. So, I'd like to begin with drawing a parallel with what we already have a certain amount or a certain level of reservation at the local self government level. So, we have reservation at the panchayat level and we already have reservation at the municipality level. This is dealt with under Article 243D and T. So, we have this reservation there. But this is like a token seat. Uh, we've created these posts, but how much influence do these women at these local government level, they kind of influence the other women? How much of uh, the women we are bringing in the mainstream politics or in terms of leadership? Now, there is this concept called as the Pradhan Pati or the Sarpanch Pati, wherein the women, they are there only as, you know, they play a nominal role, and their husbands or the male members in their families, they head the meetings, they go to the offices, and they do major work. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that we've created posts, but we've not come to a level where we've accepted women as leaders, as women who can run offices. And as much as I would like this 33% reservation to be executed, I have my own reservations and doubts about, will it actually serve the purpose? Because this can only be realized if the women themselves realize and understand the value of their independent, coherent thinking, or the contributions they can make to other women. And thirdly, and I think most importantly, that men respect those boundaries where women are actually coming up front. And another aspect that I feel where women actually do become, they come in the parliament or they hold any political post, but I seldom see any woman who's in power doing or raising their voice for the other women in need. And this is a very big issue that kind of takes us back to where we started, that women who are in power, be it celebrities that we see in Rajya Sabha or from any other field, they are not doing their bit where they raise their voices as one for the other women. um, there's this quote by James Mill. He was the father of uh, John Stuart Mill, someone we've read in our jurisprudence class. Now, he says that any society's progress or advancement can be seen from the position of women. In other words, the position of a woman is an indicator of a society's advancement. And on the other hand, a few years back, in this case of Babita Punia, this is the army case where we recently they got this recognition of being on the same level as men. They can have their ranks, their promotions, and everything else. So in this very case, we had a representative from the central government saying that uh, the women officers must deal with pregnancy, motherhood, and domestic obligations towards their family and children first. So, on one hand, till this year till 2018, 2019, 2020, we are still thinking on those lines. So, I believe that I've crossed the realm from political to the army setup. But what I'm trying to say is that there are no realms when it comes to women's rights, because we're still dealing with a mass of questions that majorly come with one aspect, that are we ready to to be governed by a woman? Are we ready to accept women as leaders? Are we ready to see them represented in this field? Or are we just want them to give these posts or reservation for namesake purposes, and we just want that for us to portray in our indexes, in our polls, that we have a certain number of women? But how much of that work actually, comes up front.
Right. So thank you, Suvaiba, for your answer. I think that we, the grassroots level of panchayats that you mentioned, or to drawing the parallel to army lines, I believe that this aspect of women struggling on different fronts is has been imperative and will continue to be. So taking from the point where you left, Suvaiba, as to the aspect that women are strong-headed and should move ahead in this direction, my question to Pranav would be that after a strong headed regime of our former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, we have not really had any female Prime Minister thereafter. So, do you believe that we have potential female candidates for the post of Prime Minister in the upcoming elections?
Thank you, Rishika. I have to say that very insightful comments have been given by both Avani and Sweba on political side of gender equality. And the question that you have asked is quite interesting, as it contemplates a future possibility. And to be honest, it becomes really difficult to answer such questions for a student of policy like me who rather likes to, end topics on different possibilities. See, coming to the question, I feel Indian political system, has never gone too intolerant on gender questions of prime ministerial leaderships. At least we have had in past, the second woman prime minister of the world from India, that was Indira Gandhi, and we have seen even women president. And throughout cabinets, since independence, we have seen a number of women ministers. Uh, as far as my knowledge goes, right now we have three women in the central cabinet, and there is one CM of a state as woman. And interestingly, this is a one incident which will always remind us of women candidature in political elections. Is the main face of opposition in 2019 general elections, that Rahul Gandhi actually lost to a woman. So though I think the representation has not gone to the scale it should have, but certainly it has not ruled out a woman prime minister. And there are a number of reasons, like, which I will want to point out to it for substantiating that point. See, our national movement, had great women leaders, and just after our independence, we saw one woman becoming a governor of the largest state, which was United Provinces. There was one woman CM, and 24 women to the first parliament in 1952. So we always had the gender equal universal voting suffrage. Now, when you compare this to other democracies like USA, where women had to fight for their rights even after becoming a democracy. Uh, Whereas in India, as I've pointed out, that it was always there from initiation of democracy. And almost interestingly, I will point out, India has seen women rulers even before independence, because when Queen Victoria was there in 1900s, only India was being ruled by a woman. And we had a lot of begums and maharanis even in medieval country centuries. So India has never gone to a position where it has not seen women leaders at the topmost positions. Now, as to future, now I feel nobody can eliminate that a lot of women politicians, whether it's Sonia Gandhi, Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, Mayawati, or Mamata Banerjee, or late Jayalalitha even, had a prospect of becoming prime minister. They just can't find enough space because of strong support. When I talk about present situation, strong support that BJP holds right now. So if a woman is to substitute Mr. Modi tomorrow, though as a leader of government, I feel people will be voting for her as long as they have support for that party. Gender has somehow gets diluted in Indian political space, and this shocks me personally because I see a contradiction out here. Because India has long struggled to give women equal rights, access to basic rights, and talk about sexual violence. I mean, sexual violence in India, I think, should be covered by Epidemic Disease Act. And to summarize on why India still has possibility is that being a parliamentary democracy, it is easier to get elevated to that post, as it is as it is your party which has to win the election. And though I will point out, in final conclusion, certain challenges that a woman prime minister or a candidate for a woman prime minister can face. First of all, being a patriarchal society, which India as such is, the question of gender always rises only for women candidate. See, she's supposed to lecture on equality of gender, etc. She is considered as champion of these rights, and this is where she faces, an additional challenge of persuading patriarchal voters, which a male candidate will never have to face. And if suppose there were two women candidates, though it will be a very rare circumstance, so this question of persuading patriarchal voters to vote for her won't arise. And second last, is that by discussing, whenever a woman candidate will be discussing about double standards in politics, woman candidate inevitably will end up feeding them. So if tomorrow, for instance, if Rishika only get nominates herself for candidature, and she's asked, has she ever faced sexism in political journey, that's actually a trap question. She will say yes, and then she will be called a crybaby, and obviously saying no will see her lose her even her candidate gender equality supporters. So eventually it comes down to that glass ceiling or scotch tape concept we generally talk about. And I think invisible sticky obstacles exist, they do. But we hope that one day a woman will be able to shake them off together.
All right. Thank you, Pranav, for such an insightful thought that you had given, ranging not only from the present or post independence era to the pre independence era as well, talking about how women's right has evolved throughout. So, well, I think that from this particular topic that we have discussed, I believe one thing that we all can conclude would be that regardless of the fact that we have eventually moved ahead to some extent with regard to women's representation, however, there is the scope still never stops. And further, I believe, even I personally think that it has to be at a much faster scale than what it is at the current moment. So now moving to the second topic of the podcast that we have to discuss, we'll now shift from the political side to the aspect of feminism in religion and caste. So my first question this time will be for Sueba. Sueba, my question to you will be that over the past few years, we have seen that the Apex Court has staunchly protected the rights of women in the religious domain, apart from others, obviously. So, how far do you think will it be practically implemented in securing and protecting the rights of women, considering the fact that the religion has any day a higher dominance over the judicial pronouncement in a layman's thought process?
Thank you, Rishika. I'd like to start by quoting T.K. Madhavan, who led the struggle against untouchability. He says, in his brief encounter with Gandhiji, he says, the removal of untouchability is an abstract idea. Temple entry is a concrete representation of that abstract idea. I personally believe that I'd say the same for gender equality. Then this needs to be a watershed moment in our country where we do not infringe any more women rights under the guise of religion. Religion in our country specifically is used as an instrument of glorifying the inequality of the gap that we have between the sexes and the castes. And I think at this moment, I'd like to talk about this very interesting theory that is known as the interest convergence theory, given by Derek Bell. He was also a civil rights activist. He says that this is a theory where he says that the powerful majority will not act in the interest of the vulnerable population unless and until it is in their own best interest. Now, the majority here being the males, I wouldn't say that all men believe in the inferiority of women, but certainly men in general feel superior with reference to the unchallenged power they can summon. And I'd say that we have so many cases. We have the triple talaq. We had the Haji Ali case. We had the Shah Banu case. We also had this very famous case, Geeta Hariharan versus RBI, wherein a mother is fighting to be the guardian of her own son. And now we have Sabrimala, the most I think burning topic right now. Now all these cases keep reiterating one thing, that for things in this context, I mean for rights that are served on a platter to men, women have to fight, women have to file cases. Now it's so like I feel kind of shocked as well as embarrassed when I say this, that menstruation is a biological process, and isolating women from their place of worship on the way their gonads function is absolutely humane. There's this French philosopher. She goes by the name of Simone de Beauvoir. She says that women are not born but made. And I think I completely believe in this quote. Why? Because, the way the women in our society are right now, the onus falls on a lot of factors, especially the judiciary, the government, the society as to how and what we make of our women. We need to ask why we are on the 112th rank out of the 153 countries in the gender gap index. And for how long will we let these we let religion overpower our basic rights. And I think another important aspect, I'd like to add as a concluding remark here, is the role of political parties when it comes to questions of women rights and religious, when women rights and religious institutes are in a tussle. And the political parties can play a very unique role in upholding the rights of the women. But what they do is that they play petty politics, they work for their vote bank. And this is where the secular democracy, the thread of secular democracy of our country, that kind of treats women as goddesses, it tarnishes, it completely, is destroyed. Why? Because this is the time, this is that very very sensitive yet crucial time when all of us can come together and bring women at the same level.
Right. So, Sueba, I think that we all would duly agree with you that mere judgments to that extent would not really make much of a difference till the time people themselves are sensitized to the effect and understand that the places where women end up having the struggle, that should not really be a point and should be an equal cakewalk for them and another gender as a part of that. So, my question to Pranav will be that, so Pranav, in the recent Sabrimala judgment, we had seen that there was a judge who was a female and she had dissented in the judgment saying that no, women cannot be allowed entry to that extent since it's a matter of religion and judiciary should not intervene. And if I draw a comparison or a parallel to the Haji Ali's decision of the Mumbai High Court, where an entry was allowed in the inner sanctorum, the division bench also had a woman judge out there. So, how far do you think the religion creates peculiarity for women rights in India to that extent?
Okay, Rishika, this is a question to understand how concepts of social sciences in particular doesn't exist in vacuum but rather interact with each other to redefine or reshape themselves. The two judgments that you mentioned are considered, at least now, considered landmark for constitutionalism of religious practices, and that is where it becomes really controversial and critical. Uh, now, two major points that I can think of, especially for a religious country like India. Firstly, that religion as an authority to govern behavior of society had existed for very long. No major religion of India, any of them, marks its presence not older than at least 1500 of years. And on the other hand, constitution as authority to govern or to constitutionalize our society has existed for what at most 71 to 72 years. And secondly, outreach of religion is much more deep and widespread than constitution. So obviously it will take time, but it is what it is now. So now coming to your question of how religion is actually controlling gender rights in India, in such a circumstance that when I've talked about how religion is much more deep and persuasive than constitution, so in such a circumstance when the constitution via the apex court tries to limit religious practices, especially those which are labeled as proliferating gender inequality, it does not garner major support of at least of masses. And as we saw in Sabrimala issue as well, that when the judgment was delivered, it was appreciated for gender equality, but then it had unexpected consequences as far as that we saw contempt of constitutional court by followers of Lord Ayappa. So my basic understanding is that we are seeing two major but parallel authorities trying to govern the same situation. Though our constitution forefathers have made it clear that everyone has a right to practice religion, but there is no clear mention of what happens when there is a conflict between religion and the constitution. And that is where the apex court brought this concept of essential religious practices. I don't want to go into how good or bad that concept is, but just that it tries to provide space to only those practices of religion in constitutionally governed nation which are essential for religion. Now the concept is more subjective than it sounds. Actually, it was used in Sabrimala, it was used in Haji Ali, but it now is in consideration of larger constitutional bench as well. So while I am at it, I would raise couple of points as to why apex court and religious reforms of any type does not go hand in hand. I've already given the reason why religion garners much support than the constitution. I will also point out why apex court judgments does not garner much support when it comes to religious reforms. The first, which I think, is that the judges of Supreme Court are generally considered to be coming from very elite population having ideas which are oblivious of ground realities. This is what their perception general is. And the judgments of the Supreme Court consist of such English terms that they can give reminiscence of Victorian age. So it creates a language barrier between the court and the masses. So the communication gap lies across the masses and the court. The second reason why I feel Supreme Court cannot do much when it comes to religious reforms is the distributive representation of the apex court. In its history, Supreme Court has seen only one Dalit and 8 women representatives. I mean, by representation, I mean judges. Only one Dalit and 8 women. This being so, there is a legal thought that indirect representative institutions, and particularly post Cold War, when we talked about institutions of surveillance and vigilance institutions. So in such a modern nation states where there is skepticism for institutions, a Supreme Court, a representative, indirect representative institution has grown mistrust among masses. Thus, non-representation of people in the court creates an additional, though very mild, factor for non-identification of voice by people in the court. And I am talking about every religion. Whether you talk about Haji Ali or you talk about Sabrimala, people don't identify their religious voices in the Supreme Court. And so you see how much, when I'm talking about this issue, that how much I have drifted away from the main issue. And that is exactly the answer to your question, that this is how much religion makes a situation peculiar in India.
Right, Pranav. So I think that we all would really agree. I mean, be it Suvaiba or be it you, the aspects of religion being so intricately intermingled in people's personal life that it has actually surpassed the aspect of people rationalizing as to how women needs to be treated and how religious practices are much beyond those differences have to be taken into account, but people are oblivious of it. So moving to Avni, my question to you would be regard to the caste system that is prevalent in India. Avni, do you believe that the aspects of feminism are flawed when they're applied in the caste hierarchy? So to give you a better aspect of the question, I would like give a brief example that a Brahmin woman would have a higher pedestal than a Dalit man, however, would be seen below a Brahmin man to that extent. But at the same time, this kind of role reversal of dominance or subservience is not a possibility for a Dalit woman or any other lower caste woman. So, what is your take on it?
Right. Rishika, I mean, at the very outset, I'd just like to say that religion, caste, and gender and all their intersectionalities are, a topic that is just beyond the realm of just my take on it. But of course, since I've been asked to answer, I'd say that, in an ideal world where my definition of feminism would prevail, which would just be like a simple statement of, say, equal rights for women, but where all women have the right to stake claim to their due. However, in reality, this definition has really failed in a sense when it comes to taking into account the kind of subaltern experiences that women in India have had. And for that matter, even if we go globally, Black women have also faced the kind of isolation, and they have felt that mainstream feminism has just been unable to take into account their history and their stories. And I think a lot of reasons come into play why this has happened. One is just the sheer fact that feminists have generally been oblivious to being the kind of urban educated people that they are. They've generally not been able to strike a chord with a village goer, for example, and that too a Dalit or a tribal village goer. Second of all, I think the lack of access to any sort of social infrastructure for the people belonging to the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, for that matter, is also a major hindrance when it comes to really feminism really trying to be open to the idea of more and more people coming into its ambit. And I think one major reason that I find is hampering this our present discourse on feminism is the fact that that caste violence in the country is generally enjoying a kind of impunity. We have seen that the convictions are abysmally low when it comes to caste violence, and we have in our NCRB data that tells us that the reported crimes are increasing. However, we have seen that it's just not really playing a major role in bringing more women to file complaints if there are. And this is also, I think, one of the major reasons why there is some discontent about missing or ignored voices. And also, I mean, I just like to say that since I started by saying that I don't know much about it, it's also a part of the problem. We have had Dalit women and many other subjugated voices who spoke in the freedom struggle, in anti untouchability movements. We have stories of the Azawa and the Parsi women's breaking caste chains, and the point still remained that they didn't get the kind of attention that they should have gotten from all of us, and in that we're all culpable, I'd say. And I think it's really high time that even generally as a society and feminists in particular realize that we need to give them more space. And if we really want that feminism as an ideology should be more cohesive, we have to make sure that we just don't have certain kind of molds out of which we create women, but we have women, and we have created many kinds of molds for all kinds of women.
Right, Avni. So, from this particular insightful discussion that we have had about religion and caste, I think that all we all would agree, be it Suvaiba, Pranav, or Avni for that matter of fact, where they have given varied opinions, not only at the Indian or the domestic level, but international level as well. So I think it's not only with the aspect of religion, caste, race per se, where the discrimination exists, it's a gender which is an additional element for women to say that if in the it's not only the religious or caste barricade which would be a problem, an obstacle for them. And the problem that we see with the feminism in today's world would be that it is being handled. The beholders of feminism or the judicial system are majorly the elite people who can afford to be the beholders. However, the main sufferers at the grassroots level are never being reached, which is why this problem is so redundant and is not being solved to the extent which it should have been. So, moving to the last topic of this particular podcast, the last topic would be with regard to the lady justice symbol which we have in the Indian judicial setup. So, to what extent is that a mere symbol, or is it actually taken in its true spirit? My question to Pranav would be, Pranav, often we hear in courts or otherwise in for people to hear that female judges or an advocate would be addressed as a lady judge or a lady advocate instead of being called a judge or an advocate. If you would have noticed, we have actually used that even in this due course of conversation as well. Even I had to use it at times to bring out the distinguishment point. So, do you believe that they are in a way, or even we at this point, are stereotyping the gender of a judge or lawyer or any other profession for that matter to be male oriented?
Rishika, first of all, I will have to appreciate how you have managed to ask the most difficult and not easy to answer question to me on this podcast. And to be honest, I have to be honest about it that I don't really have an exact answer on this because I have to be honest that my knowledge and understanding of it is too limited. Although I will want to hear others on it, but whatever limited knowledge I have, so I will try to answer on basis of that. Basically, we have now moved on to very intricacies of equality. From our behavior to our languages are now being tested and cautioned on this touchstone of equality. And there are legal reformists who are demanding right now that there shall be gender neutral languages of the statutes. So we are targeting a comprehensive gender equality. So because what we have understood is that these small behavioral changes can create big impact when it comes to reaching the higher goals of equality. So I don't know how much impact or confident that does using terms like simply advocates or judges for all makes women feel confident about it. But if it does, I think it is good to have such small changes, and probably calling someone by a appropriate title such as a counsel or advocate, and his or her last name will be best way to avoid differential treatment or conversation that creates an exclusively masculine or feminine atmosphere. We may even have, what I feel is, we may have a code of ethics for gender neutral procedure. What of I know is that Supreme Court of Texas actually have a code of ethics for gender neutral procedure in the in courts. And just additionally, what I will want to add is that there are major reforms to be made practically on field if we want real change for women lawyers, which go beyond merely choice of words. And my observations in my short tenure within legal system has been that there's still a predisposition or tendency to think about and behave toward people mainly on the basis of their sex. For instance, assuming competence on the part of assumption is there on the part of male lawyers, uh, of competence towards male lawyers, but we expect female lawyers to prove that ability. And there are still colorful remarks on the attractiveness or attire of female lawyers. And this won't limit itself to simply lawyers, but witness or litigants, which are very essential part of this justice system. I remember that during my college years, my jurisprudence teacher, Dr. Yasir Abbas, taught us this phenomenal work by Dr. Pratiksha Bakshi, where she has observed remarks and behaviors of judges and lawyers towards rape victims in lower courts, uh, which really shows the poor condition our lower courts have when it comes to sensitivity towards women as participant in the justice system. So yes, I guess the bigger picture lies in equality of treatment here, and having a proper professional code can work out.
Thank you for your answer, Pranav. I had to purposely put this question to you because obviously I would love to hear an answer from Avni and Suvaiba as well. I would want to know their take on it as well. But it would always be way too refreshing to see what a male person coming through this entire thing would have his opinion on. So my question to Avni would be that, Avni, do you believe that the Indian justice system has over the time become more conducive to suit the needs of women? And I would want you to take it to the extent as to, is there any improvement if we talk about specifically the criminal justice system of India?
Right. Rishika, I mean, Pranav, that was a very well thought out answer, I'd say. And I would have to concede that I too am not really sure of how are we to address this particular question and what really should be the way forward. Coming back to your question, Rishika, I mean, I've seen, if we are to talk about from the time since we had a criminal justice system in place, of course, we have to agree that there have been incremental changes in the criminal justice system when it comes to meeting the needs of women. However, I do feel that we cannot have a blanket statement like this and really be oblivious to the practical problems that a criminal justice system gives to its women. And I mean, it's just recently that we've come across the rise in the number of domestic violence complaints during this pandemic, and it tells us how much of a criminal justice system we need that is really sensitive to the demands of women. And I mean, what my point on this, what my take on this would be, really seeing the criminal justice system in a very stage wise manner, because I think from the time a crime is committed against a woman to the time she enters a police station and to the time she sets the law in motion and she goes to pursue her case, it's really a tormenting process, to say the least. And I can tell you from personal experience that, having had the opportunity to file a complaint in the file an FIR in a police station, that gender sensitization classes are a prerequisite for us to understand how crucial a sound criminal justice system is for women. And I think in terms of, when we come to in the terms of law, we have laws that deal with, say, domestic violence and sexual harassment at workplace, and the laws are there, of course, but I think a law is as good as its implementation, which I really find lacking. And I mean, coming back to the approach that I was talking about, we really need to understand that once a crime is committed, the first and the underlying factor for most of these cases would be patriarchy. So how do we tackle that menace, and then how do we go on to really segregating and isolating each of these stages, and trying to come up with intelligent ideas on how can we deal with a system that's more sensitive to the needs of women. And, for example, fast track courts have been a good step in this direction, where they are trying to prioritize cases of violence against women. And that really speaks huge when it comes to our efforts. However, this obsession with death penalty, but totally ignoring the gaping holes in our social infrastructure and any other infrastructure for that matter, is then the other side of the story. Another aspect of this would be how victimology has not really seen the light of the day in this country, and how women are still seen as sufferers and as victims only. They are meant to be just that. They're not meant to be survivors. They're not meant to rise into the mainstream once they've had a crime committed against them. So I think, much like all governance issues, I really see that one point where we could take this criminal justice system would be to start from the closest center that we can find, in the sense that all governance issues have this problem where it's more of a top down thing. But I think really seeing that the nearest to a survivor, the problems that are nearest to her should be given more priority. And then as we go up the ladder, we really try and, have a syncretic system which takes into account all the various aspects that play with the criminal justice system and the crimes and the women as a whole.
Absolutely, Avni. It was an insightful opinion, must say. My last question for the podcast and for the topic as well would be for Sueba. It would pertinently and directly deal with the theme that we had to discuss, that was the symbol of justice, that is ladies justicia. So, Sueba, my question to you would be that do you believe that the symbol of justice is merely a symbol, or is ladies justicia being taken in its true spirit? So, are the letters of law passive when harsh reality becomes active? What is your take on it?
Thank you, Rishika. As a woman and as a lawyer, I would like to believe that this symbol is being taken in spirit. However, there have been a plethora of cases where I know that this does not stand true. Now, I don't think we lack in law or in provisions. We have various provisions in the Indian Penal Code and the CRPC. We have Article 15, we have the Dowry Prohibition Act, we have the Equal Remuneration Act, to name a few. What we do lack is the execution and the implementation. We lack in establishing the narrative of equality. So Justice Ganguly, in a certain case, says that with changing social norms of legitimacy in every society, including ours, what was illegitimate in the past may become legitimate today. Now, this is very true for the aspect of legality and illegality. But I think a more pertinent question or a pertinent aspect with reference to our country specifically is the concept of morality. Now, for example, live-in relationships are now they are an acceptable norm. We've given them legal recognition. Now, this decision of legality and illegality that the court gives, and the way our society perceives it, is not in tandem. It's not in sync. This is where the gap widens. That the judiciary is doing its bit in giving judgments that strengthen the position of the women, but the society is not receptive of those changes, and it is unwilling to accept those new changes. Now we can apply the reasons given by Pranav also here, that that the Supreme Court judges or the Supreme Court verdicts do not have a mass appeal. Whatever the examples or the reasons may be. Another aspect or another case, if I take up, it's the concept of divorce. Now we all know how our country or how our culture takes marriage. We have a seven janam concept. We have terms like pativrata patni. We have terms like ardhangini. Now divorce is legally acceptable, but is a divorcee woman is? That is the question. So we accept, so we have the laws, but when it comes to accepting the woman, and we when it comes to the practical aspect of those things, we are not that receptive to change. Another scenario could be dowry. Now we the masses have they're so clever that they've come around the legislation and they now use terms like gifts. We can also, come to, a workplace harassment, wherein we know that these committees exist, we know their, laws exist, but wherein a woman goes up and complains against her boss, we do not look at her in the same way. So these things cannot just be controlled by law or by the letters of law. So definitely in this scenario, letters of law are passive. Now, this is the responsibility I particularly feel is of the executive, and it's enormous, it's gigantic. And I think through various, but I don't think it's not, I don't think it's unachievable. I believe that through, very carefully cultivated mediums of communication, these could be your advertisements, these could be your movies, these could be your endorsements, these could be, I think the kind of speeches our ministers, our leaders give, they kind of change and reinforce the image of the women. And we all know what kind of speeches that are usually given. We all know the kind of, the objectification of women that happens. So, needless to say, or I know there is no study of these things, or there are no polls on these things, but I personally believe that these various social mediums bring a a very holistic change in the image of women. And uh, the I think the laws exist and we have a fair amount of laws, but where we lack is the reception of those laws as a society, as the men in the society are unwilling to accept that if a woman is in a live-in relationship, that it does not hamper her character, that she is not characterless. So these various little nitty-gritties, they don't come just with judgments or orders or things that are published in live law. These things will come when I think when it goes to or seeps through the masses. And I think in light of that, I do believe that the letters of law are certainly passive. And yeah.
All right, Suvaiba, that was really an insightful answer, I must say. So I think that what we all would have gathered, not only from this particular topic, but throughout this discussion and debate, would be that though women representation, though women's participation has been a point of discussion and debate over time, it might have increased. However, it is majorly on paper. It's majorly the law which is talking all about it. It's more about the humans, it's more about the patriarchal setup which needs to evolve and which needs to imbibe, as Suvaiba also said, which needs to be on the receptive end. Then only once it is implemented to that extent, then only we can say that actually we have had the concept of feminism and things are equally normalized for women, and there is no specific reservations for women which are actually needed at this point of time. So with this, I would like to thank all of you, Pranav, Avni, and Suvaiba, for being a part of this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Do not forget to check our website for more updates and legal articles. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. See you next time.